we are going to make some spaghetti and meatballs, but actually it's penne and meatballs because I don't have spaghetti noodles. So, pretty much spaghetti and meatballs. We're gonna make some homemade meatballs. I decided I'm gonna add some Parmesan cheese into my meatballs to make them a little bit different there today. And we'll add a couple vegetables to our sauce. And then I have a hybrid sourdough yeast focaccia. Focaccia. I always missay it. So I think I know how to say it and then I don't. But we'll have one of those special flatbreads that are delicious and flavorful as well. So let's start by getting our meatballs made, and then we'll season up our focaccia and all that, yeah. So I've got 2 slices of soft bread here. And we're going to soak our bread with just enough heavy cream to make them turn into a paste, but we don't want them oozing or dripping, but just enough to kind of soak them up. So we're gonna drizzle this up. For the 2 slices of bread, it's gonna be about 1/4 of a cup on here. Now, if you use milk or half and half, they're a little bit thinner, so you'll end up using less of it to make your bread soggy. I like the cream because I think it makes a really rich meatball that's really juicy and tender. So we've got our 2 slices of bread, and again, they're just soaked enough to get them soggy, but not like dripping with it, because you don't want too much liquid in our base. Then we're gonna add in 2 eggs, 1 egg per each pound of meat, and so I have a pound of Italian sausage and a pound of ground beef. And then we're gonna add in some onion powder, about 1 tablespoon of onion powder. It's gonna give it a great, nice, savory flavor. And then I have about 1 teaspoon left of Italian seasoning, so we're gonna put that in there. That's like 1.5 teaspoons. There. We're gonna do about 1 teaspoon of basil. Give it a good shake. A little bit more. And then 1 teaspoon of oregano. And we're going to do about 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. And then about 2 teaspoons of garlic salt. Okay. And then we're gonna add some of our Parmesan cheese in now to break it up. That way it'll be easier to work with. I'm gonna use shaved Parmesan cheese because I love the shaved Parmesan cheese from Costco, but grated, you can take the time to grate it yourself as well, but we're just gonna use this. So I'm gonna use about 1 handful of it for our meatballs. So it'll be like close to a 1/2 cup. We're gonna do a good kind of crunch up to it so I don't have these huge sheets of it, but I do love this stuff. And that way we'll have this kind of like little melted cheese bits throughout our meatballs. So just be delicious. Okay, and then I'm gonna drop my noodles in over here because my water is nice and hot and boiling before we mix that up. So we're just doing a kind of a penne right here, pasta. But really you could do any one that you want for this. There we go. I was like, I know if I hold it, it's gonna burst everywhere. And we're just gonna add the whole bag in today.
What's a good substitute for Parmesan cheese?
You can always skip it out if you don't want it. If you do love a cheese, you could also do mozzarella. Mozzarella works well. But I also don't add it in a lot of times. I just like to change it up every now and then, make it a little bit different. And I hadn't made spaghetti and meatballs in a while, so I wanted to kind of get that in. Let's get this in here. So now we're gonna make our penne, which is gonna be the binder for our meatballs. And that's kind of that spices, cream, milk and egg, or cream, bread, and egg base. This is gonna season up our meatball and kind of hold them together. So you're just gonna kind of squeeze it through your hands. It's gonna be a bit chunkier because of course we have that cheese in there. But that way, when we mix it in, it will incorporate in well. And then we're gonna add in a pound of ground beef. And I have a pound of Italian sausage, that mild Italian sausage that I've taken out of the casing. Because again, I buy mine in bulk at Costco, and therefore they're always in the casing. And then you're just gonna go in with your hands the same way, and you're gonna squeeze that paste through your hands until you've got it all combined. We're gonna switch because a little bit cold today. You know, it's like our fridges in the garage. As the winter comes, I feel like they're even colder because they don't have to work as hard to keep things chilled, and it's cold. But we're gonna mix this up. We're gonna get that penne, which is our binder, mixed all the way into our meat, which is going to just flavor it up and then keep them bound together so that you have a nice tender meatball and not a dry one. And I know there's really, like, you could try to do this with a spoon, but the best way to really get them mixed up evenly is to just get in there with your hands and get it done. Here. And I think I have it fairly well mixed up. Now you can see kind of like the meat is now, the colors of it between the Italian sausage and the ground beef are all kind of one mixture with that nice and delicious Parmesan cheese throughout. So now we're gonna make our meatballs. And you're essentially just gonna grab off, and you can really pick any size you want. I'm just gonna do the classic kind of meatball size. Now they're gonna shrink up a little when you bake them. You don't want to go too small because, of course, you want a good hearty meatball. And since it's spaghetti and meatballs, good size. Now, sometimes I do my giant meatballs, which are delicious, but they do take a lot longer to bake. And since my schedule has already changed twice tonight from sports, because it's cold weather, they've changed everything around. I thought I was going to have a much different evening, and this is why I don't meal plan, because things change. Earlier I was like, ooh, I'm going to do pork belly with homemade naan and like an arugula salad, and then like this avocado lime vinaigrette on it, and it was going to be delicious. And then I got a message that my daughter's soccer practice was being bumped up, and then I got a message that my son was having basketball practice, so it just things got changed around with, very little time to kind of maneuver everything.
And all the chicken pot pies.
Oh, yes. So for a friend asked me if I could make her, earlier this week I made chicken pot pies, as you guys know, and I had given some to my parents, and she had shared some with her friend. And she loved them so much, she asked me if I could make her some chicken pot pies. And so after our lunch stream today, I made 15 mini chicken pot pies, and then an apple crisp, and baked up a loaf of sourdough bread for her to have for dinner tonight, because she was having some guests in from out of town. So it's been this is a full day of cooking today. Good thing I love cooking. So it was fun because I had never actually made the super mini, or like the smaller ones, but I normally, when I make chicken pot pies, I just use my mini ones, I use my deep dish kind of pizza pans that I have. But since I was going to be making her so many of them, I ordered some of those like 5-inch pie tins, which, 5 inches in my mind seemed a lot bigger of a pie tin than they were. And I was like, these are small, because it was 5 inches from like the outside depth. But they turned out to be like the perfect individual sized chicken pot pie. So we whipped that up for them. And then it was like clean up, get out for sports, on there. But we did take a little video of our little thing, so we'll send out a little short of that, tonight or tomorrow. So tomorrow probably, so you guys can kind of see that. But they were really cute. And then I came up with this idea that because I'm kind of like a nerd, that on Pie Day, March 14th, that I was going to make a bunch of different mini pies in lots of different ways for it. Because, and this is forever ago, but I remember back in 9th grade when I was in Algebra 2, and our teacher made pies for us on Pie Day back then. So it was just weird, but she made everybody, and she taught like 7 periods, so she made everybody mini pies. That's a lot of dedication for your students. And then we played games that day, and she changed all of these candy bars to, instead of like payday, it was Pie Day. Again, this is not random tangent I went off on, but I feel like I'm gonna do it now because of the mini pie bands I have, and they were so cute. And imagine that you do a whole bunch of different flavors. I think it'd be so cool. Okay, let's get this last meatball rolled out. Look at that, I perfectly divided them up into our things. I'm gonna wash my hands, and then we'll get those popped into the oven to bake that. Wash, scrub down first. And unfortunately, there's no good way to really get in on making homemade meatballs without getting your hands dirty. Okay, let's get these popped off into the oven, and then we will get our focaccia seasoned up, and we can pop those in the oven next as well. But I want these to start going. We'll start these on my top one, and then once we get that focaccia seasoned up, we're gonna drop the meatballs down, and we'll put it in there. These need, since they're a good size, I'm not gonna set it because I know it will be good at the time, around 15 minutes or so to kind of bake up at 425. Let me give my noodles a good stir here. This is penne, but it needs always a little bit more time to cook. I can tell it still needs a minute just by stirring it. So we did kind of a hybrid yeast sourdough focaccia. So I have my sourdough discard in here. I'm gonna grab my spices real quick. And kind of just got that mix of it. Let's do oregano and basil as well. So we gotta get all the good spices and season it up. So we're gonna drizzle some olive oil over the top. Now I already did kind of coat it with a good amount of olive oil when I stretched it out and put it into our pan here. Looks like I need to move on to the next bottle. Now the thing about focaccia that makes it so delicious is you do use a bit of oil to kind of coat it over, but that gives it this really chewy, kind of crunchy crust on it, but it has this soft, tender flavor in the inside. So we're gonna spread over with this, and then this is the fun part. You kind of go in with your fingers and you're going to dimple it. Now this one, again, is a hybrid, so it does have that yeast in it, to help it, because I made this one as kind of my quick version of it versus the longer one where I do all sourdough as the leavening agent, but that needs like 8 to 12 hours to sit. This is one that you can make up fairly quick on it, but it won't have as chewy as a crust as a traditional just straight up sourdough one. There we go. We're gonna sprinkle a little bit of garlic salt over. Now this is definitely key to giving that nice kind of garlic bread flavor to it. It makes it delicious. So don't skimp on it. We're gonna do a little bit of black pepper. A little bit of basil. You could also just sub out your oregano and basil for some Italian seasoning if you wanted as well. A little bit of oregano. And then I'm gonna put on some of our flake Parmesan cheese, so it'll kind of be like a cheesy bread focaccia, like a garlic bread. Spread it out, get a couple of these nice sheets and lay it on there. But I'm not covering it up like a pizza. You still want to have some spots where the bread is nice and popping through. And we're gonna go pop this in the oven, and we'll let this bake up at 425. For this, we're gonna move our meatballs down, put this on top. And then I'm gonna set my timer here for about 17 minutes is all that really needs to kind of cook that up on there. I'm actually gonna do a stretch and pull real quick. I started before I left on my, to go do my drive around town to get all the kids from soccer and whatnot and get them off baseball. I started whipping up some more sourdough. So we're gonna do our stretch and folds. This is like round 3 of the stretch and folds for sourdough loaves.
You have a question? How long do you bake the meatballs for?
So the meatballs need just about 15 minutes or so. We're at 425. So they won't need as long because it's a higher heat. You can do them at 350 for about 20-25 minutes since they're not super large on there. So when that focaccia is about done, we'll take them out. We'll be probably done a little bit sooner, and then we'll throw them in there. But because I moved them down underneath the focaccia, they're getting a little bit less direct heat, which means they can take a little bit longer in there. But we'll bake them and then we'll throw them into our sauce on there. But that's the nice thing about meatballs is it takes a lot to overcook them. So even if you leave them in there an extra 5 or so, 10 minutes, you're gonna be good because they're pretty hardy and can withstand a little over baking. Let's get our sauce going. We're gonna put in about a tablespoon of olive oil in here. Get my bowls out of the way here. And then I'm gonna dice up an onion here. Mince it up, we're gonna put it in there and let it start to saute. We're gonna take our noodles because they're gonna be getting kind of close to ready soon. I've got garlic, sweet peppers, in here. We'll season up our sauce just a little bit. So what I love to do with spaghetti sauce, and I make my own sauce a lot of times, but I have found that during the year, especially when practice has changed and you've got like 40 minutes to make a good dinner before you're out and about again, jazzing up a store-bought sauce is it's just worth it. Homemade sauce, yes, delicious, it's great. But if you find a good store-bought sauce, it's pretty darn close. And it saves you a lot of time on here. So we're just gonna jazz up some Rayos, which I really, really love for it.
Question, what brand of olive oil do you like?
Honestly, I am not a super picky brand when it comes to olive oil. I am the person who buys what's on sale type of thing. Because when you're cooking with it, those flavors get masked by a lot of those different spices. And so you don't necessarily need a really great one like you would if you were, dipping your bread in it. Let's grab a noodle. I think like 1 more minute. And so that's why I sit there and I'm like, it's one of those things where I don't necessarily need, get a nice high quality one for cooking because it's getting the job of being my non-stick and adding a little bit of the fat into it versus like that flavor profile. Now, if you're going exclusively for dipping it in, then yeah, you want to get bougie. But I find that olive oil, like a lot of things, is very personal to your preference. Some have very distinct flavors that people love and other people don't. Back in the day, and I don't know if they still have some around, but here in Nashville, they used to have an olive oil store where they literally just sold olive oil, but you could go there and they had like bread samples and you could taste all the different like variations of it. You know, I typically like a lighter olive oil that isn't too strong in flavor for if I'm going to be dipping my bread, but for cooking, Publix has these good deals, and I swear they change a different brand every week, but it's buy one, get one free, and to me, that's like a $10, $15 savings. And then I also get the Costco one a lot as well. But, you know, since it is just my main staple for cooking in versus a tasting, whatever's on sale. You don't need to break the bank. Okay, we're gonna mince up our garlic and we're gonna get this going. I'm gonna turn down my burner here to about a 5. I'm using my 6-quart saute pan, which cooks a little bit faster than a nonstick. So when you cook on the all metal pans, you don't wanna go as high because you'll burn yourself. Grab my colander. My noodles should be done. Since we're doing a marinara-based sauce, I'm not going to be keeping any of my liquid. Heavy. That's it here. And you don't need to coat it with oil or anything like that to keep them stuck. I always throw my pasta into my sauce, which will then cause the noodles to break apart from each other. So you don't need to worry about that. I find that if you coat them in a lot of that oil or butter, then the sauce won't soak into the noodles and flavor it. So let's get these bits of garlic in there to toast up. About a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half. Now I'm using fresh, but garlic also works well for this. We're gonna give it a good stir and let it kind of toast up just a little bit. Let those flavors come out so it can really kind of enhance our marinara. And then I'm gonna mince up my bell pepper here. That's gonna give us some more flavor and a little bit of texture. I was deciding what vegetables I was all going to add in. Sometimes I add in mushrooms or zucchini in there. You can go even more bolder, get some eggplant, kind of turn your spaghetti into a ratatouille. Although it's funny, so my son Torrin, he's always like, Mom, you need to make a ratatouille. And I was like, and he loves ratatouille. He's one of my best vegetable eaters in the sense of like if I make it in a sauce that way, he'll eat it up really, really well. We're going to chop it up nice and small. Again, that way you just get little bits throughout, and I think that just blends a little bit nicer in it. For my bell pepper, I find that if you slice it from the inside versus the skin on the outside, you're going to get a cleaner cut that has a bit more control with your knife because of that texture on the inside. Allows you to grip it up fairly easy. And I always say I've got my 3 tricky vegetables, which are where your knives are going to slip if they're dull. And those are peppers, tomatoes, and onions. So if you find that your knife struggles cutting those, they slip, it doesn't get a good grip, you just need to sharpen up your knife and then it'll be much easier to cut with. Okay, let's get these guys. Last one up. And then I always stick, when I get my bell peppers, I stick with the reds, the yellows, the oranges, because they're a little bit sweeter and less bitter. I find that the green ones are more bitter in flavor, so just not quite as nice. I know that they do charge you a little bit more for the red, yellow, and orange ones, but their flavor is nicer. And I'm just going to go over it coarsely just so we don't have any really big chunks. Okay, let's get our garlic and onions nice nice little coat up here. And we'll get our peppers toasting up. And it smells delicious. We're just gonna kind of coat them around in here. And then I will kind of spread it nice and thin so it can kind of saute up. Okay. Now while those are sauteing it, our spices are over here. We're gonna saute these up and give them a little bit. You don't need to go too crazy because, again, our marinara sauce that we're gonna use has a lot of great flavor in it. But I do like to help it just a little. We're gonna do a little bit of oregano. And again, all of these are the same flavors that we used in our meatballs, so they blend really well together. A little bit of basil. This is about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of each. But a nice kind of sprinkle over. I'm letting them hit the pan and toast up and steam up because that's going to bring out their flavors a little bit more. You can definitely use a fresh version of both like oregano and basil, and that works wonderful. You're just going to want to use a little bit more, like closer to a tablespoon or so of each one, because the dried ones just kind of pack a bit stronger taste once you've got it cooked. And then we're just going to do about a half a teaspoon or so of garlic salt.
How was the beef stew?
It was wonderful. It was delicious. It's so funny. My older daughter, when she got home, she like just came over here and she was like picking out all the beef chunks out of it. And I'm like, you gotta eat some vegetables. And she was like, I'll have the potatoes with it. And I was like, all the vegetables, they're delicious. But she thought it was really good. The broth, I made a very different type of broth base, one that kind of reminds me of like beef bourguignon. So we had that, we made kind of that mirepoix using onions, carrots, and celery. And then we had the tomato paste and the red wine. And it was just very rich and delicious. Okay. Now you can see all of our peppers and our onions and our garlic here. They're just coated in those nice spices, so they'll just have a lot of flavor in here. Let me just take a peek at our time. We have left. Okay, perfect. Just a few minutes left on that. Let's get our sauce. This is where I said you can definitely take the time to make your own sauce. But if you find a good sauce, and I think you have to taste to find what's your favorite preference. For me, I really like the Rao's because it's not too sweet and it's not full of a lot of spices. It's just very simple and very plain. And so I really like it as a nice base sauce. Okay. We're gonna add in our marinara. We're gonna give this a good stir around. So we've got our first jar in. We're gonna use 2 because we're, again, a big family. And we're gonna kind of coat this up. Always making a mess. Look at that, I got both of these jars. First time opening it.
It's all the bench pressing.
I know, it is. It's so funny, so like my son, who's 13, soon to be 14, he started, into lifting weights, and I lift weights in the morning, and for a while I was like caught up to him, and I was like, yeah, I think when I'm at like 125 right now, I bench press, and I was like bench pressing the same as him, and he's like a little over 6 feet, and I was like, oh yes, your mom's benching the same as you. He quickly added some more weight to his, and I was like, oh, go right ahead, I'm not adding any more weight to mine yet. I like it to be nice and easy. He tells me that I don't do a true bench press because I guess I don't go all the way down, but it's just enough. I'm working on, the underneath arms. I don't need to be, Hulk Hogan over here. Okay, we've got our sauce kind of stirred in here. If you like a creamy sauce like a vodka sauce, you can add in some cream, about like a fourth of a cup, and you'll have that richness to it. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. It just depends. Let's give it a taste, see. Perfect. Let's go check on our sourdough focaccia. Sourdough discard yeast focaccia, because it's a whole bunch of everything in there. And our meatballs, and see if they're ready on there. We've got about 2 more minutes, but meatballs should be ready or just around time. Oh, and that focaccia is looking pretty good. I actually think we're ready. The best way to check with your meatballs is you give them a tap. If they're firm, they're done. You can see that Parmesan cheese kind of melting and doing about them. I'm gonna cancel this off, and then I'll grab that once I get this over here. So we'll get both of them because they're both ready. Let's see, perfect timing. We're gonna get our meatballs. These are our Parmesan meatballs using both ground beef and Italian sausage. And this is our yeast sourdough discard focaccia. So a quick one. It's one that you can whip up in like an hour, hour and a half, and get a great focaccia. It just gets a little bit of that rising help. So it's going to be a little bit softer than a true sourdough focaccia, but it's still going to have that chewy, crunchy crust on it, which will be delicious.
Stark, since you again.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Chuck. We appreciate that. So here again, you can see we've got our nice, like the sheets of the Parmesan bubbling up. We added on basil and oregano. In our dough, it was a very kind of simple dough. I used about a cup of my sourdough discard with a tablespoon of yeast and about 4 cups of flour, a little bit of honey, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of garlic salt. Let's get our Parmesan homemade meatballs here into our sauce. I like to get them drenching in there, keeps them nice and moist and juicy. I'm going to turn this down nice and low, and then we're going to slide these guys. So this is, again, we used a pound of ground beef and a pound of Italian sausage. We mixed in about a half a cup of Parmesan cheese, which you can kind of see that Parmesan cheese kind of melting over it. We're just going to dump those in. Get them nice and beautiful. And we made a lovely penne using our eggs and bread and cream. And then, of course, Italian spices, garlic, salt, black pepper, oregano, and basil. There we go. But they are going to be the most tender, juicy meatballs. And that's, I think, the thing that's like the turn off of when you use make them yourself. They're just so much more tender and less dried out that you get if you buy like the pre-made ones. And meatballs are really easy. They do last really well. Like you can freeze them up on there. We're gonna toss in our sauce, and then we're gonna be ready to serve up, because this is one of those great meals that you can make homemade in there. So again, I said don't worry about if your noodles stick together here, because once we kind of dunk them in, they're going to separate out. And you can do spaghetti, or I've got a penne here. Anyone really works well for this. But we're gonna just kind of cover it up. Beautiful. Now you cook your noodles to right at al dente or a smidge before, because you put them in that sauce, so they will soak up a little extra liquid, but they will make them just absolutely so flavorful, especially for keeping the next day if you have extras. It just gives you that nice, delicious kind of soaked up, flavorful pasta the next day. Okay, beautiful. Let me get this guy over here. I'm gonna grab out my cutting board for our focaccia, because we cut off our piece and we'll be ready to serve up here. Now, when I made the focaccia, still a little hot, I kind of made sure I oiled it down, but I like to cook it on the metal versus on, I'm gonna pull it up so I can slide my thing under it, versus on a parchment paper, because I find that it gives it a better crunch. But with that being said, it does take a little, finagling to get it under. You just take your spatula and you're gonna work around it and slide it under to get it to lift up. And then once it's completely up, it will fall right out. But you wanna make sure we get it all there. Perfect. Just wanna make sure that when I flip it off here in just a second, it's all gonna slide off. It's a big one. I normally don't make it quite this big, but it's going to be delicious. So look, it's gonna have all those flavors of a garlic cheese bread because we have that garlic salt and that crispy olive oil layer on it. Now let's get ready to serve up our meal. We'll serve this one up in a bowl because it's kind of spaghetti. Grab my Parmesan. And we'll need our bread knife. And let me grab a real spoon because I won't be able to fish out any pasta with that. Okay, guys, tonight we have our penne pasta with our jazzed up marinara sauce where we added in garlic, onions, bell peppers, oregano, thyme, and basil. And then we made our homemade meatballs using, I'm trying to get some sauce, using Italian sausage, ground beef, Parmesan cheese. We made a homemade penne using eggs, cream, and bread to bind them together so they're gonna be full of flavor. We'll top it with some of our shaved Parmesan cheese. And then of course, we will serve it with a generous slice of our soft, but yet you have this crunchy outside to our focaccia with nice little garlic and Parmesan cheese on it. Well guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day to kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of our meals at home, you can just go to our page, search for what we made. So we've got our Parmesan meatballs with our penne and our sourdough discard focaccia, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. I've got my knives, my cutting boards, I've got my all-clad, I love I will say my 6-quart saute pan. It's my pasta pan, it's just great for that on there, but I have all the different gadgets that I use in the kitchen in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here.